Good evening. Assalamu alaikum. So, as you can see on the screen there's a map of Victoria, and it's all the tribal groups that are across Victoria, the main tribal groups with particular languages. There's about 39 across the state. Some say about 42, but we'll give or take a couple. But that just gives you an idea about the breadth of how Aboriginal and Torres Strait people, well, Aboriginal traditional owners in Victoria are spread across the state. So my name's Andrew Hassan Gardiner, a proud Wurundjeri man of the Wurrung speaking people. The people of Greater Nam, which is Melbourne. I'd like to thank Monica and Lawrence for inviting me to come along to have a chat with you tonight about the possibility of you appreciating Aboriginal identity and a voice, having a voice. I'm a former resident of the Wyndham area in Hoppers Crossing. I lived here between 95 and 98. And so thank you for allowing me to be back in the area. So humbled tonight to talk about a key note around identity and voice. Aboriginal people generally, we had an oral history. We had an oral history which was passed down from generation to generation. We believe in what our ancestors and our elders tell us as being the truth, because we did not have a written history. So everything was shared around a campfire with stories. We did not own land. We were and still are custodians of the land. It's like our mother. It cares for us and it gives us resources like food and shelter and a whole bunch of other things. For thousands of generations, our people lived in harmony with the land and the environment. We travelled across our clan homelands using and harvesting only what we needed. So we cared for the land. Some of that chili's still a bit hot and sweaty, eh? I got a bit wet coming down today, and I dropped off some tables and chairs to a relative's place, and I got a bit wet. So when I got changed, I thought, I'll be dry tonight. No, this is really making me sweat again. We'll progress. We looked after the land and the waterways, and it cared for us. We'd not pollute the waterways, so the fish, eels, crayfish remained plentiful. We used our low temperature cultural burning practices that reinvigorated the grasslands, and new growth that came back brought kangaroo, wallaby and emu to areas that replenished our resources. We used thick bark to make gunya, a shelter. I might just flick through and see if there you go. So that's the gunya. There's a lot of different terms across Victoria for that, but basically it's a lean-to. So it's a shelter, a temporary shelter. As we moved around our clan homelands, we'd come back to these sites and we'd need to rebuild it a bit. But essentially, that was our shelter. Also, we had possum skin cloaks. A very important part of our community. It showed status, it showed that you'd done something for the community, for the people around you, for your clan. So in the top right-hand corner in the photo is an example, which is actually in the Museum of Melbourne Museum. And you can see in the bottom left-hand corner a group of men who have got their cloaks around them. So they had a symbol. That cloak for men in standing in a group was a symbol of their authority. These kept us warm. We also had stone splinters which formed spearheads. And we used bent branches, carved those to make boomerangs. Our ancestors would travel extensively, even to higher reaches around Mount Buller, to seek rocky outcrops and caves during autumn winter to collect bogong moth. The bogong moth was a rich source of proteins and fats. The Wurundjeri Wurrung people had regular ceremonies with our brother and sister tribes. The Wadawurrung around Geelong, the Djadjawurrung around Bendigo, the Tongarong around Mansfield, and the Boonwurrung from Mornington Peninsula. Together, when we came to do ceremony, we formed what's known as the Kulin Nation, the nation of men or people. During these ceremonies, political agreements were reached, arranged marriages were granted, goods and implements were traded, like stone axe heads, possum skin cloaks, fully made, and handmade tarnuks, which were receptacles for holding things. I'm reminded about one of our esteemed elders, Uncle William Barrack, a great-great-uncle. My family has direct lineage to his sister, Annie Borat, and further back to his father, Beberjan, who was a head man of the Wurundjeri Wyndham clan in the 1800s. He was a signatory of the failed Batman Treaty. John Batman, who came to the old Melbourne town in 1835, spoke with many of our elders seeking a treaty or a contract. I'll just flick forward and see if we got that. That's some pictures of Batman. And the bottom left-hand corner is a image of the actual treaty itself. He wanted to trade blankets and other implements shown in the picture. He wanted to trade that for our land. These things our ancestors never used. They didn't know of them. The document note that he would be the permanent beneficiary of such a contract. He's trying to set himself up as the first property developer, if you like. What our ancestors understood under their law, L-O-R-E, was that they agreed to a tanderum, a temporary use of land, much like a visa, temporary visitor's visa. After which time, a couple of weeks, then they'd go back to where they came from, go back home. The signatures on the contract were not given under full, free or prior consent, not translated properly for full awareness and knowledge. The ancestors named in the treaty document had never used a pen before. They had not gone to school and not got a pen licence. So how could they have used one to sign their name? Batman confirmed later that he'd held their hands and scrawled what he understood their names to be. So I would suggest under common law principles this would make the contract void. He went back to Van Diemen's Land and the governor of the day cancelled that treaty. 4 years later, however, he wasn't back, but further atrocities were to come. 1839, land from the Plenty River to the Werribee River was sold by a government that was not here. Our ancestors had not ceded their sovereign rights to their land, nor had they sold or gifted it away. So under what authority did that government sell that land? Not under our law. Our ancestors did not receive a penny from those sales. In only 2 years, only 29 British men owned large parcels of land, our traditional country. Tell me, does that sound fair to you? Thank you. Our ancestors became weak. They grew hungry. They were malnourished, as they could not hunt and gather their traditional foods. A few years later, in 1862, the first missions around Victoria were established. Now people were pushed onto them to be totally controlled like a concentration camp. I use that term because it needs to have some tension to it. You need to feel how that affected our people. Permission had to be given for everything by the Aborigines Protectorate Board. To leave the mission for work, to go and visit sick relatives, to get married, to ask for more rations, as theirs had been shared with other families coming onto the mission. Uncle William Barrack, or Barrack as he's generally known, was the last head man of the Wurundjeri people at the turn of the century, from 1899 to 1900. He passed on to the Dreamtime in 1904. In the later part of the 1800s, as the leader of the people living at Corranderk Mission outside Hillsville, he spoke for them. Barrack, along with several other elders, his colleagues, his contemporaries, that they respected him a lot, made a couple of dozen trips to Parliament House in Melbourne to deliver petitions for those living at Corranderk, seeking support for better living conditions, like rations and materials for huts. But they fell on deaf ears, disrespected, and their journey not recognised. However, that was the voice in action. Barrack made these 70-kilometre, around that area, around that distance, trips by foot. Can you imagine? They had no cars or horse or cart. There was no sealed roads then, just bush tracks. Today it takes 50 minutes to drive from Melbourne to Hillsville. Back then, it was the best part of a day and a half for older men, while a few stops along the way. By 1930, all the missions had been closed, as the state did not want to continue to fund anymore, and most people were classified as half-castes under the Half-Caste Act of the late 1890s. They had to leave the mission. It was felt because they had white blood in them, they could assimilate into society. Only thing, racism took hold by the squatter class, had to take their land. Our ancestors were ejected and forced to live on the outskirts of towns. They became what was known as fringe dwellers. There was a movie made about that in pretty much the 80s. You should have a look at it one day. Government policy required our children to be forcibly removed or stolen from their families, supposedly for a better life. The ladies in the room, if you've got children, put your hand up. How would you feel in the middle of the night, your front door being kicked in and your children taken out of their bed, and you're standing going, why? Why? But far too often, they were sent to orphanages to be trained as domestic servants for the girls or farmhands for the boys. Both were preyed upon and abused by ruthless white overseers. These children, now known as the stolen generations. A lot of those descendants had put their stories to the Child Sexual Abuse Commission a couple of years ago, most in Ballarat, told devastating stories of how they'd been treated. There are 22 registered massacre sites across Victoria. Big question. How many were not registered under a policy of genocide? Hearing and accepting stories of the past, that Australia has a black history, gives us understanding and direction for a new and better future. We share with you. The waves of immigration since 1945, after the Second World War, have all felt the unfairness of discrimination, meted out by white Australians who felt it was their right to do that. We are on the same journey, and Indigenous people welcome you to BIC, which is traditional country. We ask that we are recognised and respected as First Peoples of this country. The Uluru Statement from the Heart was developed over several days by over 200 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, delegates from each state and territory and the Torres Strait, who gathered in 2017 at the National Constitutional Convention in the Red Centre, a call for voice, treaty and truth. The Prime Minister of the day in 2017 rejected treaty out of hand. The State Government of Victoria took up that, saying that they could do a treaty with traditional owners in Victoria. To wit, the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria was established in December 2019. Over the past 3 years, on behalf of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in Victoria, they've developed a treaty proposition with 3 pieces of heavy work: the Treaty Authority, the Treaty Negotiating Framework, and the Self-Determination Fund. All 3 of these pieces of work will assist local traditional owner groups to undertake their local treaties with the state government. On behalf of you, the Victorian people. In 2021, the Uruk Justice Commission was established by the First Peoples Assembly and the state government. A safe place for communities to tell their truth, to tell their stories of trauma and oppression perpetrated on our people. I needed to give you this history, this identity, because there's some more examples coming. That's where the Prime Minister's delivering a bit more of an announcement about the proposition of having the referendum at the end of the year to establish the voice. As you can see, Marsha Langton there, Auntie Marsha Langton on the far left-hand front side there, and Tom Culmer, Uncle Tom Culmer, sitting behind. They both signed off a document which assisted people to understand what the constitutional change and the voice to Parliament means. There's other people there too. Big beard just to the right of the Torres Strait Islander flag is Uncle Patrick Dodson, commonly known as the Father of Reconciliation, because he headed up Reconciliation Australia for many years. He went to school in Western Victoria, did you know? At the podium to the left of the Prime Minister is Professor Megan Davis, and just to her left is Minister Linda Burney, Minister for Indigenous Relations. Yeah. So the voice to Parliament. The Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, announced that a referendum would be held in the last quarter of 2023. It's expected to be in October or November. The ballot paper question, which will be a challenge for you to read and make a vote. It's not voting on names of who you're electing to the local seat, but it's a yes or no question. The question, a proposed law to alter the Constitution to recognise the First Peoples of Australia by establishing an Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Do you approve this proposed alteration? That'll be the question on the ballot. Pretty simple. Yes. The proposed law that Australians are being asked to vote upon is being set out in the Constitution Alteration Bill and is subject to the Parliament's approval. This will be debated in June, in coming weeks, through the Senate. If approved at the referendum, the bill will add the Constitution, Chapter 9, Recognition of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Peoples, 129, not too sure exactly what that means, but Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander voice. Now that will enshrine in the Constitution an Aboriginal voice. A good thing. If the referendum is successful and the Constitution is amended, then there is an opportunity for further constitutional change. As you know, or some of you may know, there are about 15 or so clauses in the Constitution that discriminate against, particularly Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. This is an unacceptable thing today. For example, a person from overseas can become an Australian citizen at a citizenship ceremony today, and they have full rights afforded to a citizen of Australia. They have the right to vote in any election and referendum. I encourage new citizens to exercise their right to vote. But there's a clause in the Constitution that says that a Premier or Chief Minister of a state or territory can determine whether an Aboriginal person can vote at a general election. This is unfair and discriminates against our people. We want to experience the opportunity of a fair go. What do you think? That wasn't everybody. The last successful referendum, because there've only been a handful. Well, no, I'm telling you why. But there's been a few. The last successful referendum was held in 1967. It took 4 years to develop. The question posed then, there was two. It was a double banger. The first was to increase the number of seats in the House of Representatives. The second was to include Aboriginal people in the population. In other words, the census. It did not. The yes vote did not give us the right to vote, and it did not give us Australian citizenship. These rights came a few years later. Aboriginal people did not vote at that referendum. My mother didn't vote, or wasn't allowed to vote. My father did. However, that was the most successful referendum ever held, with a 93% yes vote. Come full circle. Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people have the right to vote at this year's referendum, and they will. And we ask all Australians to vote as well, because not everybody votes at a general election. But please vote at this referendum. The chief architects of the Uluru Statement from the Heart, Professor Megan Davis, who's in the photo there, Dr. Patricia Anderson, and Mr. Noel Pearson. I know them all. I've met them and I've had lots of conversations with them. They were recognised in March 2023, this year, jointly by the City of Melbourne and the University of Melbourne. They were awarded the Sydney Peace Prize, being the chief architects of the Uluru Statement. A simple way to look at the voice to Parliament will be like a lobby group. Lobby groups already exist, if you didn't already know, on behalf of many mining companies, Farmers Federation, renewable energy companies, amongst many others, for relief on export markets, reduced tariffs, or taxation relief. The Australian Medical Association is a big peak body that is a lobby group as well. And they've had some success with Medicare and primary health service delivery that we all benefit from. So, the question, why can't we have our own lobby group that seeks inclusion, a better deal for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in this country? There are many other things that divide the country. Detention centres, racism, hate speech are but some. The voice to Parliament will not divide the country. It'll enable our people to go to Parliament and tell our story and tell our truths from our communities that should change the view of the Commonwealth Government and support our situations, which have been far too long forgotten about. I ask you to exercise your right to vote at the referendum and to please consider voting yes. I'll just go back a tad. You see that slide? Some of those children are the types of children that were taken from their homes, put into orphanages and expected to learn. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner they've got pencils. They're inquiring minds, but they're still wondering, why am I here? Where's my mum? Where's my dad? Where's my sisters? Where's my brothers? Where's my cousins? Where's my grandmothers? Some of the statistics that are there are astounding. We're still just 2% of the national population, but we're way overrepresented in the criminal justice system. Why is that? We had, in the early 90s, a Royal Commission into Aboriginal deaths in custody. 339 recommendations were provided to the federal government. 70 of those were attributed to each state and territory police service or force. Only 15 of those have been enacted in Victoria. What about the rest? Deaths in custody are still happening. It's not acceptable. It's not acceptable in today's society. Why our people continue to die in custody, either in cells in police stations or in prison. The number of higher education recipients that have earned their degrees, not half due to the fact that the system tries to hold them back, is growing. It's a great thing. There's more doctors and lawyers and nurses and professional people in society today. It's a great thing. Proportion of unemployeds continues to increase. We seem to be the only people that need to want to employ our own people. That's a good thing and we do that, but we expect the broader community to do that as well. So, it's not a glim story, but it's a story of hope for the future, for our people, and for generally the Australian community. That's a copy, that's a draft of the Uluru Statement. It's not that big. It's not that big a deal. Your support will be necessary. Also, your support will be necessary for the ensuing state treaties which will be negotiated next year. The statewide treaty with the state government on a broad base, and then individual treaties thereafter. Australia, I was fortunate enough to go to the Commonwealth Games last year in Birmingham, in the UK, to invite everybody to come to Victoria in 2026. We were part of the closing ceremony. It was great. The elders that were there, we were able to hand over message sticks to the Commonwealth Games Federation President, inviting, as symbolically it is, inviting them to come to Victoria. That's hard to do when we know Australia is the only Commonwealth country that has not got a treaty with its Indigenous people. United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People, Australia is a signatory. Natural progression should be that Australia signs up and does the right thing by our people, rather than leaving us behind. We want to be ahead of the game. We want to be in front of you, calling you on. I'll leave that with you. Thank you.